Elijah was a young man who was given a message. He was sent. We have no record that he was ever trained. He was just sent. He finds himself in the court of the king and he delivers the message, and the message is simple. It's not going to rain again until I tell you. Pretty powerful statement. But in case he gets too big for his boots, God sends him off, and he sends him to a place where there are no people. He sends him out into the desert places, and he's there fed by ravens. God predicts that this is the way it will work. But eventually, that little stream dries up. And after months with no rain, Palestine turns into a desert. Famine comes. Heat parches the landscape, cracks lips, shrivels skin, saps hope from every soul and every creature in that part of the world. A lack of water changes the value of things. Simple food becomes more precious than gold. Many would exchange their life savings, all that they have, for a crust of bread. These times are desperate. Despair and hopelessness are visible on the faces of parents. Children in distress just whimper in weakness. One mother had gathered the last of the flour and the few remaining drops of oil to make her final meal, and then with her son lay down to die. First of all, Elijah needed to know that he must rely totally on God. That was why he was sent into the desert. God was the source of his strength. And now he's going to have to rely on the giving hand of a woman. This is totally out of character. This is culturally inappropriate. This single man should never have been in this house. And yet God sent him there. Sent him there to learn a lesson. Sent him to a house with a child in it. And he's saying to this prophet, you will never reach my people until you know how to minister to my children. I want you to pick up the story. 1 Corinthians, it'd be nice if it was there as well, but it's in 1 Kings. 1 Kings chapter 17. And God tells him to arise and go to Zarephath, which belongs to Sidon. This is outside the borders of Israel. See, I have commanded a widow there to provide for you. So he arose and went, and when he gets there, he sees this woman, and he just reaches out to her, and he says, would you bring me a little water in a cup that I may drink? Now, in a time of drought, you collect muddy water and you let it settle. They've got to the bottom of their wells. She's got a drip, a drop, a small amount. And this man walks in. God's chosen the right woman. Many others would have simply said to God, forget it, and said to the prophet, no way. I'm not sharing this precious liquid with you. But not this woman. And as she's going away to get it, he says something else. As he was going to get it, he called to her and said, please bring me a morsel of bread in your hand. What? That's an unbelievable ask, isn't it? She's about to make a final meal, and she and the son are going to lie down to die, and this man walks in and asks for precious liquid, which she had harvested from the mud at the bottom of the well, and now he wants more. He wants bread. What a hide. And she says in verse 12, as the Lord your God lives, I do not have bread, only a handful of flour in a bin and a little oil in a jar. And see, I am gathering a couple of sticks that I may go in and prepare for myself and my son that we may eat it and die. They're at the end of the journey. And he, in verse 13, says these words, "Do not fear." What nonsense. Do not fear. She's facing the end of her life. It's not just her, it's her son that is going to be lost. Do not fear. But Elijah knows something that she doesn't. He has been miraculously fed, and he knows that God is capable of continuing that journey. And he says to her, "For thus saith the Lord God of Israel, the bin of flour shall not be used up, nor shall the jar of oil run dry until the day the Lord sends rain on the earth." And she goes away and she does what he says. And I love this verse, verse 16, verse 15. "So she went away and did according to the word of Elijah, and she and he and her household ate for many days." It wasn't just the three of them. It was the extended family. When you're given, you only get more as you give it away. And she does not just give to Elijah anymore. It's expanded. I don't know whether the Lord's hand kept the whole village going, but I'm sure it did. Because the bin of flour was not used up, nor did the jar of oil run dry, according to the word of the Lord which he spake by Elijah. We find in this story that Elijah is, one, asked to do youth ministry. Two, he's to bring a message of hope. Fear not, it's not all over. There is somewhere else. There is something else that's going to happen. So there's a message of hope that comes through. And then I want you to look at verse 17. "And now it happened after these things that the son of the woman who owned the house became sick, and his sickness was so serious that there was no breath left in him." We have young people in our church who are headed in the same direction. Our church is hemorrhaging. The reason why PCM is so important is because from that group we lose so many of our young people. It's a flow that needs to be stopped. And this young man, this child, has died. And if you look at verse 18, "So she said to Elijah, 'What have I to do with you, O man of God? Have you come to me to bring my sin to remembrance and to kill my son?'" Somehow this woman has connected her sin with her son. We're only told she's a widow. We're not told how this child came about. But somehow in her mind, this child was part of her sin. "Did you come to reveal my sin and to kill my son?" Now, is this misplaced blame or what? What did Elijah bring? He brought hope, he brought health, he brought food, he brought a tomorrow. But the child dies. And this woman accuses him of killing her son. Now, he could have stepped back from that and he could have said to her, "Hang on, you were on your last meal. You were making your final meal when I arrived. I bought food. I bought hope. And he could have gone on and on. But he steps back and he shoulders the misplaced blame. In youth ministry, you have to do that all the time. So often, the church says, "It's your problem." Members come up and blame you for their children walking away. But it is not your responsibility. And I want to learn something here from what Elijah does. It says in verse 9, he said to her, "Give me your son." Those are the words that you and I use in youth ministry. Entrust your children to me. Let me work with them. He takes the lifeless body of this child. Give me your son. So he took him in his arms and carried him to the upper room where he was staying and laid him on the bed. And I want you to look carefully at verse 20. Then he cried. Then he cried. How long has it been since your heart was touched by what is happening in our church? How long has it been since you were overwhelmed by the loss of young people? I know the heart of God aches, but how long has it been since your heart broke? And then he cried. My sister left home when she was only 16. She went to do nurses training. And in her training at that period of time, they allotted a single individual patients to single nurses. And my sister had a whole series of people that she cared for. She came in, she took their pulse each day, she cared for their needs, she bathed them when it was needed, all that sort of thing. And she came on duty this day. She walked in, and I only know this story with hindsight because I wasn't there. I was on the receiving end when she came home. She walked in, and the lady was cold, and she took her pulse, and there was none. And in absolute panic, standing beside this dead woman, my sister bolted from the room. She ran as fast as she could. And there was an old nursing sister down at the desk who grabbed her and said, "Where are you going? What are you doing?" And this nurse, she told the nurse, "She's dead, she's died." And my little sister stood there shaking and crying. And then the old nurse said to her, "It's your responsibility." That's all she heard. "It's your responsibility." And so my sister thought that she had killed this lady. So the tears really flowed now. And then the old nurse took her by the hand and walked back down, and she said, "Because she has passed away does not mean your duty is over. You care for her still." And together, this little girl, my sister, helped them move the lady's body and then pushed her through the hospital ward and then right down into the basement to the morgue. And shortly after that, she came home. She got out of the taxi at our house. She walked in the door and she just broke down and she sobbed and sobbed. And I knew what it was. I jumped the gun. I thought it was that nasty old woman who was the caretaker of the nurses group who'd done something to her. And I was ready to jump in the car and go over and give her what for. Nobody treats my sister like that. I'm pleased I didn't, because as my dad held her, and she sobbed and cradled her in his arms, and she coughed out the story. Her first loss, her first death. She's been a nurse now, still is. She's 65, still nursing. She became the head nurse in a nursing home, and every shift someone died. Every shift that she was on, some old person passed away. My sister doesn't cry anymore. You can't keep crying or it destroys you, is what she's told me. But in the church, we've become so used to losing young people who are walking away to certain death. And we're used to it. We accept it. We do little about it. But it's time, as leaders of young people, that we alert the church to this and do something about it. This prophet does something else, verse 21. He stretched himself. Don't do this, incidentally. Don't follow his example. Cry, because it says in verse 20, he cried out to the Lord. His cry was not just one of emotion. It was a cry towards the one person in the universe who could do something about the situation. But then he goes up to the room, he goes into the room and he stretches himself out on the child 3 times. And he cried out to the Lord, "Oh Lord my God, I pray, let this child's soul come back to him." And the Lord heard the voice of Elijah, and the soul of the child came back to him, and he revived. And Elijah took the child and brought him down from the upper room into the house and gave him to his mother and said to her, "See, your son lives." We are in a ministry of life, not death. We bring hope in a world of despair. And Elijah takes this child back to his mother. "See, your son lives." And then the woman says to Elijah, "Now by this I know that you are a man of God." What? She didn't know that he was before? The everlasting flour, the continuous oil, the water that was always there. She didn't know that this was a man of God? "Now by this I know that you are a man of God." Youth ministry, when you bring a child back, suddenly people recognise that you are a servant of God. Amen. "See, your son lives. Now I know by this that you are a man of God, and the word of the Lord in your mouth is the truth." It wasn't before. It certainly is now. Touch the children of the church for Jesus, and the whole church recognises God's leader. It's an amazing thing, but we don't have time to really take it any further. But I wish we had the time to look at the mentoring process that Elijah undertakes with Elisha. It's 6 years. He calls him for 6 years. And we don't know much about the time that they had together. But we do know one thing, that Elisha did not want to lose his master. And that chapter 2 of 2 Kings, is a powerful study, which we haven't got time to look at now. I want you to go to chapter 4 of 2 Kings. We know that Elisha comes on the scene a long time after Elijah has been on Mount Carmel. He's done fabulous things. And then, towards the end of his ministry, God says to him, "You've got to leave someone behind to replace you. You've got to replicate your ministry in another person." And he does. He pulls in Elisha. And Elisha is a very reluctant student. The mentoring goes all the way until Elijah goes back to heaven and the young man's left on his own. Go back and read chapter 2 of 2 Kings in your own time and see that this man who is about to replace Elijah is lacks so much confidence. He calls out as he hits the water with the cloak of Elijah, "Where is..." What is the words he says? "Where is the God of Elijah?" It's not his God yet. 6 years of travelling and he's still looking back to his mentor. But I want you to come to chapter 4. Chapter 4 of 2 Kings. Very, very similar story. Here you've got another woman who looks after Elisha and his servant, Gehazi. And Elisha wants to say thank you. And Gehazi says to him, "Boss, haven't you noticed that this lady and her husband don't have a son?" And Elisha says, yeah, okay. And so he says to this woman, "This time next year you'll have a child." What does the woman say? "Don't toy with me. Don't you think we've tried? We've tried everything. We've been to every doctor. We have failed. There are no children." But Elisha says, "About this time next year, you will have a son." And her response, Don't joke around. Don't play with me. This is a sore spot in our lives. But the child is born. You know that. And he becomes the light of his father's life. And this little boy is like a puppy. He follows his dad everywhere, out into the field. And it's there in the field that the little boy gets sunstroke, and he comes to his daddy, and his daddy says, send him home. Take him back to his mum. And he takes the little boy home, and she takes him in, and about noon, the Bible records at about noon, the little boy's breathing stopped. And she picks up the child and she carries him up the stairs to the room she'd prepared for Elisha. And she lays him on the bed, and then she gets on a donkey and she says to her servant, you are to stop for nothing. With impending death, this is the most important thing that we do. She says to her servant, don't stop, drive the donkey, drive him onward. And Elisha is praying at the top of the mountain, Mount Carmel. And as he's praying there, he looks into the distance because he's a man who's interested and sees what's coming and sees what's happening. And this woman is on her way. And he sends Gehazi down to her. And he said, I've got a message for her. I want you to run to her, meet her, and say to her, is it well with you? Is it well with your husband? Is it well with the child? And she answered, what did she say? It is well. She lied. The child's dead. What is with this woman? It is well. It's not well. And you will find in youth ministry again and again, you will ask the question, how is Johnny going? Oh, he's good, Pastor. He's not good. You know he's not good. But parents lie about their children. It is well. And then she came to the man of God at the hill and she caught him by the feet. And again, I want you to see that this is totally, utterly inappropriate behaviour. In that economy, in that setting, a woman never touched a man's feet. If you want to know what it means, go back and read the story of Ruth, where she goes in and covers his feet. There's an awful lot of extra meaning here. But she grabs hold of his feet. And the well-meaning servant, who doesn't pick up on the anxiety, doesn't see the pain, can't see the hurt in this woman, comes over and wants to kick her. He's trying to say, get off. What you're doing's wrong. You can't touch the man of God. Let her alone. Let her alone, for her soul is in deep distress. Those are the words that come from Elisha. A man who is sensitive to the needs. He reads the situation. Let her alone. Her soul is in deep distress. And the Lord has hidden it from me and has not told me. So she said, listen to it again. Did I ask for a son of my Lord? Didn't I tell you don't play with me? It's worse now. Now I've had this time to love this child and he's gone. Didn't I say don't do this to me? What's happening here? Misplaced blame. Did I ask a son of my Lord? Did I not say do not deceive me? Then he said to Gehazi, get yourself ready, take up your staff, and take up my staff. Elisha gives him his staff. Take up my staff in your hand and be on your way. If you meet anyone, don't greet him. If anyone greets you, don't answer him. But lay my staff on the face of the child. And the mother intervenes. So what you've got here is a mother who is so concerned about her child that she doesn't want an intermediary. She doesn't want this servant, and you know what Gehazi's like because you meet him again in the next chapter. He's the guy that steals all the stuff from Naaman. This guy is a ratbag. Did you have that expression? He's a waster. He's a hopeless case. He's walked with the man of God and learnt nothing. And the woman says to him, as the Lord lives and as your soul lives, I will not leave you. Go back to chapter 2 and you will hear those very words coming out of the mouth of Elisha himself. And he says those to Elijah. So now the woman's using his words back to him. Now Gehazi went ahead of them and laid the staff on the face of the child, but there was neither voice nor hearing. Therefore he went back to meet him and told him, saying, the child has not awakened. He's still dead. That staff is nothing but a lump of wood in the hands of Gehazi, but in the hands of the prophet, it comes with healing. There's a hill on Calvary, at Calvary, and there was a lump of wood there that is meaningless apart from the hand that was nailed to it. That's where the power comes, not from the wood. Shunammite woman is desperate. Elisha came into the house. There was the child lying dead on his bed. He went in, therefore, and shut the door behind the two of them. And what did he do? What did he do? If you weren't here early this morning, you missed an incredibly powerful season of prayer. I just want to thank you, brother. That was wonderful this morning. I was a bit full with my news from yesterday to be able to pray, but it was wonderful to hear the prayers this morning. What does he do? He goes to the source of power. And he prayed to the Lord, and he went up and lay on the child and put his mouth to his mouth, his eyes to his eyes, his hands to his hands, and he stretched himself out on the child, and the flesh of the child became warm. And he walks about and he continues to pray. And he goes back. And ultimately the child sneezes 7 times. That's the work of an eyewitness. The child sneezes 7 times and comes back. And look at the words in verse 36. Pick up your son. Pick up your son. We're involved in a really intimate ministry. You don't do it from a distance. You don't do it from a pulpit. It's intimate. It's up close. It's personal. The most powerful ministry happens when you're in the presence of young people. Don't think you'll do successful ministry from a desk. You do it in person. Intimate, up close, personal. Here he is, sensitive to her pain, knowing the source of power. He goes to his knees. You and I have been called to youth ministry. Ministry that offers hope in a world of despair. Love in a world of pain. Sometimes we must shoulder misplaced blame and not rise to defend ourselves. Joy is common, but a heart for this ministry knows tears. It calls for sensitivity. It will mean personal contact with both God and young people. In both of these stories, there is much in common. And we could go back and look at the common threads. But I want to look at only one thing now as I close. I want to focus on prayer. It's easy for us to let this aspect of our lives slip. To become just plain busy. Busyness rapes relationships. It substitutes shallow frenzy for deep friendship. It promises satisfying dreams but delivers hollow nightmares. It feeds the ego but starves the inner man. It fills a calendar but fractures a family. It cultivates a program but ploughs under priorities. Busyness. And I look at this room and I see men and women who are overwhelmed with the busyness of the jobs you're in. All of us become busy, too busy to pray. And one of the first things that is crowded out of our busy lives is time with God. A pattern can develop. Recognise it. Admit your need. Stop. Maintain the quiet time. Delight yourself in the Lord. When we came to prayer this morning, And my brother said, let's kneel. I've got arthritis in my knees like you wouldn't believe, and I got down on that floor down there and I thought, Lord, this is going to be a long period with you this morning, even if it's only a minute. And then my brother must have sensed my pain, and he said, be comfortable in God's presence. So I sat on the step. God doesn't care how you come to him, so long as you do. Maintain the quiet time. As a young youth director in the British Union, I had left a church of young people behind. I prayed for them regularly, but now I was in an office a long way from their local church. And quite regularly I'd pray for these young people that I knew personally. When you get to the union, you know lots of people, but you don't know anybody deeply. And I was wrapped in prayer time. I said to my secretary, I have to have the first half hour of every day. Please don't let me have any phone calls. If there's visitors, keep them out. If I don't get my time with God, my day's disaster. And she was good. She was like a little terrier. If somebody came walking up the hall and was about to knock on my door, she flew out and she, not now. You'll have to come back. 8:30. And this morning I was there in prayer, and you know what happens when you're praying. I was focusing on God. I was giving him the glory. And this boy's face came into my mind. Have you had that happen? And I kept pushing him away. I said, Lord, get rid of him. That's not what this is about. This is you and me. And he kept coming back. And I kept saying, go away. I've got the face there. And eventually I thought, well, I'm fairly slow. I thought, maybe God is sending the face. And so I stopped and I picked up a pen and I said, I've got no idea where he is. So Lord, if this is you, I want a phone number. I'm not looking it up. I'm not going to let him disturb us any longer. Give me a number. And I wrote it down. I wrote down a number and I tried to go back to prayer. Well, you know what happened. I'm distracted now. I've got a phone number on my desk. What do I do with that? So I decided I would call. And I picked up the phone and I rang the number, and I already had my excuse. When the person at the other end, whoever it might be, answered the phone, I was going to say, look, I'm sorry, I've obviously got a wrong number. I didn't realise I didn't want to tell them that I thought God had given me the number. You know, people don't understand that. So I'm waiting, and it only rang twice. And the voice that answered told me who she was. And I told her who I was, and she said, Barry, I've been praying for weeks about my son. And I said to God, if you love him, tell me somehow that you care. And God touched a young man who would have turned away from a face that interrupted his prayer, but was able to assure that mother that God loved her boy, even more than she could. Don't neglect the quiet time with God. He does powerful things for us as we do. My challenge to you this morning is to take your job seriously. Pray your way through it. Give yourself a chance to see God work. And the only way that happens is when you step back to leap forward. Prayer is powerful. You know that. Don't neglect it.